My name is James Wilson, and I'm 58 years old. What I'm about to tell you happened a few years back when I was still a park ranger at Whispering Pine State Forest in northern Michigan. Now, I wasn't new to the job. I'd been patrolling the trails and keeping an eye out for lost hikers for over 2 decades. It's not the kind of gig you do for the money, but more for the love of the outdoors and the peace it brings. My friends used to joke that I should have been born a century earlier, out there trapping and exploring like the old mountain men. Whispering Pines was a vast expanse of towering evergreens, crystal clear lakes, and rugged terrain. It attracted thousands of visitors each year, from casual day trippers to hardcore backpackers looking to test their mettle against nature. I'd seen it all over the years: lost kids, injured hikers, and even the occasional bear encounter, but nothing could have prepared me for what happened that autumn. It started innocently enough. Late September brought a chill to the air and painted the forest in a breathtaking array of reds, oranges, and golds. Tourists flocked to the park to witness the spectacle, and we rangers were kept busy ensuring everyone stayed safe and followed the rules. My partner, Mia Rodriguez, and I had just finished our morning briefing when the first report came in. James, Mia, our supervisor Max Mulligan called out as we were heading to our patrol vehicles. Got a missing hiker reported near Beaver Creek. Family says he went out yesterday afternoon and never made it back to the campsite. Can you two check it out? It wasn't an unusual request. Hikers sometimes got turned around or decided to camp out an extra night without letting anyone know. Mia and I headed out expecting a routine search and rescue operation. We found the missing hiker, Daniel Bradshaw, about 3 miles off the main trail. He was dehydrated and a bit scratched up, but otherwise fine. What struck me as odd was his insistence that he'd been chased off the trail by something he couldn't quite describe. "It was big, James," Daniel said, his eyes wide and voice trembling. "Bigger than any bear I've ever seen. And fast. God, it was so fast." I chalked it up to dehydration and fear playing tricks on his mind. We got him back to his family and thought that was the end of it, but it was just the beginning. Over the next few weeks, we had an unusual spike in reports about people going missing. Now, that's not entirely unheard of. Folks get lost or injured, and sometimes they wander off the trails thinking they're invincible. But this was different. The disappearances weren't adding up, and the unease in the community was palpable. I remember joking to Mia one crisp November morning, maybe Bigfoot's finally decided to vacation in Michigan. But deep down, I was worried. Something didn't feel right in the forest I'd called home for so long. It all came to a head on a brisk, late October day. The air was crisp, and the leaves were a fiery palette of reds and oranges. I was supposed to meet up with Mia for a routine check of the trails. We always split up and covered different sections to make the rounds quicker. That day, I was assigned to the northern part of the forest, an area not frequented much by tourists. Mia didn't show up at our usual meeting spot. I waited for a good hour, thinking she might have gotten caught up with something. I tried calling her on the radio, but there was no response. So I figured I'd start without her. She was probably fine, I told myself, maybe helping a lost hiker or dealing with some minor emergency. I was about 2 hours into my patrol when I noticed something off. There was this smell. Something putrid and metallic, like rusted iron mixed with decaying leaves. My first thought was maybe an animal had died nearby, but the forest has its way of cleaning up after itself. This smell was different, almost unnatural. Curiosity got the better of me, and I decided to follow the scent. After all, it's part of my job to check for anything out of the ordinary. I found a small clearing, and that's where I saw it, Mia's ranger hat on the ground, covered in what looked like blood. My heart dropped into my stomach. There was no sign of Mia, just the hat and a few scattered tools she usually carried. This wasn't a simple case of getting lost. Something bad had happened. I radioed for backup, but the response was crackly and full of static. Vance Trail. Need. Was all I could make out. I had no choice but to investigate further. I felt a sense of dread creeping in, but I pushed it aside. Mia was out there, and she needed help. I followed a faint trail of blood leading deeper into the woods. My mind raced through 100 different scenarios, none of them good. The trail led me to an old rundown cabin. I knew about this place. It was abandoned years ago and left to rot. No one ever came out here, not even the most adventurous hikers. The door was ajar, and inside it was dark, the kind of darkness that eats up the daylight. I called out for Mia, but there was no response. I stepped inside, and the smell hit me like a wall. It was stronger here, almost suffocating. That's when I saw it. In the dim light filtering through the broken windows, I could make out a figure slumped in the corner. It was Mia. Her body was mangled, almost unrecognizable, and there were deep gashes all over her. I felt a wave of nausea, but forced it down. I had to stay focused. Before I could process what I was seeing, I heard a noise from behind me. I turned around, and there it was, the creature. It was tall, easily over 7 feet, with long limbs and pale, almost translucent skin. Its eyes were the most unsettling part, black and void-like, as if looking into nothingness. It didn't move at first, just stood there, staring at me. I reached for my sidearm, but the creature lunged before I could draw it. The next few moments were a blur of terror and adrenaline. The thing was unnaturally quick. It swiped at me with claws that seemed to extend from its fingers, tearing through my jacket and into my flesh. Somehow I managed to land a hit on its arm with my flashlight, and it let out a sound that was more of a hiss than a scream. It recoiled, giving me just enough time to scramble out of the cabin and into the woods. I didn't look back, just ran as fast as I could, blood dripping from my wounds and adrenaline pumping through my veins. I don't know how long I ran, but eventually I collapsed from exhaustion and blood loss. When I woke up, I was in a hospital bed. They told me a couple of hikers found me unconscious near one of the main trails and brought me in. My wounds were severe, but I was lucky to be alive. The official report said Mia was attacked by a bear, but I knew better. I told them what I saw, but they dismissed it as shock and trauma. Who would believe a story like mine? A 7-foot-tall creature in the woods. It sounded insane even to me. I couldn't go back to the forest after that. I took a desk job with the State Parks Department in Lansing, away from the trees and the memories. But I never forgot. Sometimes in the quiet of the night, I think about Mia and that creature. It's still out there, I'm sure of it. They never found any more bodies after that, and the disappearances stopped. Maybe it moved on, or maybe it's just waiting. I don't know. All I know is that I'll never set foot in those woods again. The cabin was eventually torn down, and life in the nearby towns returned to normal, or as normal as it could be. People moved on, but I couldn't shake the feeling that we hadn't seen the last of it. That creature, whatever it was, left a mark on me, a reminder of the things that lurk in the dark corners of our world. Mia's family deserved the truth, but how could I explain what really happened? They held a small memorial for her, and I attended, feeling like a fraud for not being able to save her. Her husband, Mike, looked at me with eyes full of questions I couldn't answer. Their 2 teenage kids, Anna and Liam, stood silently by their father's side, their faces a mixture of grief and confusion. I tried to go back to my life, but the nightmares followed me. I'd wake up in a cold sweat, reliving that moment in the cabin. I started seeing a therapist, Dr. Amelia Chen, but even she seemed at a loss when I described the creature. Maybe it was a manifestation of your trauma, she suggested. But I knew what I saw was real. Months passed and I settled into my new routine in Lansing. The desk job was mind-numbingly boring compared to my days as a ranger, but it was safe. No unexplained creatures, No life or death situations, just paperwork and meetings. I thought I was starting to move on, to put the horror behind me. Then, one night in late March, I got a call from another ranger, Marcus Johnson. He was an old friend and one of the few people who didn't treat me like I was crazy after what happened. Marcus was now stationed at Whispering Pines, taking over my old position. "James," he said, his voice tense. "Something's happening here. A hiker's gone missing in the same area where you found Mia. The search party found strange markings on the trees, and there's this smell, like iron and decay." I felt my blood run cold. I knew then that it was back, or maybe it had never left. I told Marcus to be careful and hung up the phone, my heart heavy with dread. I knew I couldn't stay away any longer. I owed it to Mia, to the missing hiker, and to everyone who set foot in those woods. Against my better judgment, I packed my gear, including a gun this time, and headed back to Whispering Pines. As I drove through the night, I couldn't shake the feeling that this was a terrible idea, but I had to do it. I had to face it, whatever it was. I met up with Marcus at the ranger station just as dawn was breaking. The familiar smell of pine and damp earth brought back a flood of memories, both good and bad. Marcus filled me in on the details of the missing hiker, a 28-year-old woman named Alison Cooper, last seen 2 days ago near Beaver Creek. We set out to search the northern part of the forest, the area where I'd had my encounter months before. It was eerily quiet, the kind of silence that makes your skin crawl. We reached the clearing where I'd found Mia's hat, and that's when we saw it. The creature was there, standing in the shadows of the trees, watching us. Marcus raised his gun, but I knew it wouldn't be that easy. The creature moved with a speed that defied logic, and before I could react, it was upon us. Marcus fired, but the bullet seemed to have little effect. The creature slashed at him with its long, razor-sharp claws, and he went down with a scream. I aimed my gun and fired, hitting it in the chest. It staggered back, and I took the opportunity to grab Marcus and run. We didn't stop until we reached the main trail, where a group of early morning hikers found us and called for help. Marcus was in bad shape, but he survived. The creature had disappeared into the woods, and was leaving us with more questions than answers. The official report once again blamed a bear, but I knew the truth. The creature was still out there, waiting for its next victim. I couldn't stay silent any longer. I wrote down everything I remembered, every detail of both encounters, and sent it to the local paper, the Whispering Pines Gazette. To my surprise, they published my story. It caused quite a stir in the community. Some people believed me, sharing their own strange experiences in the forest. Others dismissed it as the ravings of a traumatized man. But it didn't matter. What mattered was that the truth was out there. The forest was no longer just a place of beauty and peace. It held secrets, dark and terrible, that needed to be exposed. I never went back to being a park ranger. The memories were too painful, the fear too real. But I found a new purpose. I started a support group for people who had experienced unexplained phenomena in the wilderness. We met twice a month in a small community center in Lansing. At first it was just a handful of us, me, Marcus, once he recovered, and a few others who had read my story and reached out. But as word spread, our numbers grew. There was Lisa, a wildlife photographer who swore she'd seen something matching my description in the forests of northern Minnesota, and a retired geologist who had encountered strange, inexplicable phenomena during his expeditions in remote areas. Each story was different, but they all shared a common thread, the feeling that there was something out there, something beyond our understanding. I also started giving talks at local schools and community centers, not about the creature specifically, but about wilderness safety and the importance of respecting nature. I couldn't bring myself to scare kids with tales of monsters, but I could teach them how to stay safe, how to be prepared, and most importantly, how to trust their instincts when something doesn't feel right. As the years passed, the memories of that night in the cabin never faded, but they became easier to bear. I found solace in helping others and in knowing that I had done what I could to warn people about the dangers lurking in the wild places of the world. To this day, I still wonder what that creature was and where it came from. Was it some kind of undiscovered species, a government experiment gone wrong, or something even more inexplicable? I don't have the answers, and maybe I never will. But I do know this: the world is vast and mysterious, and there are things out there that defy explanation. My experience changed me forever, opened my eyes to a reality I never knew existed. And while I can't go back to the person I was before, I found a way to move forward, to use my experience to help others, and maybe, just maybe, prevent someone else from going through what I did. As I sit here in my small apartment in Lansing, looking out at the city lights, I can't help but think of Whispering Pines. The forest is still there, still beautiful, still drawing visitors from all over. But now, when the wind blows through the trees carrying the scent of pine and earth, I imagine I can hear something else. A whisper, a warning, a reminder that in the depths of the wilderness there are secrets best left undiscovered. And yet, part of me knows that as long as that creature is out there, as long as there's a chance it might hurt someone else, I'll never truly be at peace. So I keep telling my story, keep helping those who've had similar experiences, and keep hoping that someday we'll understand what's really out there in the shadows of the forest. Until then, I'll be here, ready to listen, ready to help, and always, always watching the trees. My name is Robert Noason, and at 67 years old, I've seen my fair share of the world. For the past 18 years, I've been working as a park ranger, a job that's allowed me to embrace my lifelong love for the great outdoors. Growing up in a small town nestled in the Blue Ridge Mountains of North Carolina, I spent my childhood exploring the forests and streams that surrounded my home. Now I find myself stationed in the stunning Hocking Hills region of Ohio, a place of breathtaking beauty and, as I've come to learn, deep mystery. It was last year when everything changed. The events that unfolded in those dense woods have left an indelible mark on my psyche, altering my perception of the natural world I thought I knew so well. On that fateful day, I set out on what should have been a routine patrol with my fellow rangers, Sarah Conn, Kate, and David Reeves. We'd been grappling with an uptick in reports of lost hikers and even a few missing persons cases. While it wasn't uncommon for inexperienced visitors to underestimate the wilderness, there was something different about these incidents. A shared unease had settled over our team, a feeling that something was amiss in our normally peaceful park. We began our patrol just as the sun was peeking over the horizon, its warm light barely penetrating the lingering fog that clung to the treetops. The air was crisp, carrying the earthy scent of damp leaves and pine. As we made our way deeper into the forest, the sounds of nature surrounded us, the melodious songs of waking birds, the soft rustling of small animals in the underbrush. David, always wanting to lighten the mood, quipped, "Hey Ron, you think Bigfoot's behind all these missing folks?" We shared a laugh, unaware of how eerily close to the truth his jest would prove to be, albeit in a way none of us could have imagined. As we pressed on, we found ourselves in a particularly dense section of the forest. The ancient trees towered above us, their gnarled roots creating a treacherous obstacle course on the forest floor. The canopy was so thick here that it almost completely blocked out the sunlight, casting everything in a perpetual twilight. Despite having a map of the area, it was clear that this part of the woods hadn't been thoroughly explored or documented. It was in this shadowy realm that we stumbled upon our first clue, an old weather-beaten backpack, half buried beneath a thick layer of fallen leaves. Sarah carefully picked it up, her brow furrowing as she examined its contents. "There's nothing in here but some mouldy clothes and a wallet," she reported, her voice tinged with concern. The wallet contained an ID belonging to a man named Richard Simmons, who had been reported missing nearly a decade ago. A chill ran down my spine as I realized the implications of our discovery. We marked the location and pressed on, our senses now hyper-alert to our surroundings. After what felt like hours of trekking through the increasingly wild terrain, we came across an abandoned campsite. It looked as though it hadn't been touched in years. A fire pit filled with ashes, long since cold, rusted cooking utensils scattered about, and the tattered remains of what was once a tent. The scene before us seemed frozen in time, preserved in the perpetual gloom of the deep woods. David muttered under his breath, "This is starting to feel like something out of a horror movie." None of us could disagree with his assessment. As we were about to move on, Sarah called us over. She had found a notebook, its pages warped and stained by years of exposure to the elements. With gloved hands, I carefully opened it, struggling to decipher the faded and often illegible writing. Most of the entries were indecipherable, but a few stood out with chilling clarity. Richard had written about seeing something in the woods, a tall, thin figure with impossibly long limbs and eyes that seemed to glow in the darkness. He described hearing strange noises at night, like whispers carried on the wind, always just on the edge of comprehension. The last few entries became increasingly frantic and disjointed, painting a picture of a man whose grip on reality was slowly unraveling. We decided it was time to head back to the ranger station and regroup. On our return journey, we encountered more unsettling evidence. Scraps of clothing caught on branches, a broken watch lying face down in the mud, and most disturbingly, what appeared to be fragments of bones scattered among the leaf litter. While we couldn't be certain they were human remains, the possibility was enough to set our nerves on edge. Back at the station, we reported our findings to the local authorities. They promised to send out a search team, but we all knew that wouldn't be enough. Whatever was happening in our woods, it was clear that we needed to take action ourselves. We agreed to venture out again the next day, this time better prepared and armed for whatever we might encounter. As dawn broke, we geared up for our return to the forest. I carried my trusty rifle, David armed himself with a shotgun, and Sarah holstered a pistol at her hip. The weight of the weapons did little to ease the growing sense of dread that had settled over us. Retracing our steps from the previous day, we made our way back into the heart of the woods. The forest seemed different now, more menacing. The usual chorus of birdsong and rustling leaves was conspicuously absent, replaced by an oppressive silence that seemed to swallow up every sound we made. Upon reaching the abandoned campsite once more, we made the decision to split up, each taking a different direction to cover more ground. In hindsight, it was a decision we would come to regret. I headed east, pushing deeper into the uncharted areas of the forest. The trees here grew so close together that I often had to turn sideways to squeeze between their massive trunks. The air grew thick and heavy, filled with an earthy, almost primordial scent that seemed to clog my nostrils. I'm not sure how long I had been walking when I first caught sight of it. At first, I thought it was just a trick of the light filtering through the leaves, a tall, impossibly thin figure standing motionless among the trees. But then it moved, with a quickness that defied belief, almost too fast for my eyes to track. My heart pounding, I called out over the radio, "Sarah, David, are you seeing this?" All I got in response was static. Against my better judgment, I decided to follow the figure, keeping my rifle at the ready. It led me to a small clearing, and that's when I saw it up close for the first time. The creature, for I could no longer pretend it was anything else, was vaguely humanoid in shape but unmistakably alien. Its skin was a sickly pale color, almost translucent, stretched taut over an impossibly thin frame. But it was the eyes that truly chilled me to my core, glowing with an unnatural, otherworldly light. Where a face should have been, there was only a smooth, featureless surface, broken only by those terrible glowing eyes. Before I could even think to raise my rifle, it lunged at me with inhuman speed. The impact knocked the wind from my lungs and sent me sprawling to the forest floor. I scrambled to my feet, firing wildly as the creature darted around the clearing. My shots seemed to have little effect. Where they connected, instead of blood, a thick black ichor oozed from the wounds. The battle that ensued felt like it lasted an eternity. I emptied my rifle, reloaded, and fired again and again. The creature was relentless, its attacks growing more frenzied with each passing moment. Just when I thought my strength would give out, it suddenly retreated, melting back into the shadows of the forest as quickly as it had appeared. Battered, bruised, and gasping for breath, I radioed Sarah and David, telling them to meet me back at the campsite. When we regrouped, I recounted my harrowing encounter. David was skeptical at first, but the genuine fear in my voice and my obvious injuries were enough to convince him. Sarah, who had always been more open to the unexplained, believed me without question. We made our way back to the ranger station, our minds reeling from the implications of what had happened. We knew we couldn't leave that thing out there, especially if it was responsible for the missing hikers. But we also knew we were ill-equipped to handle such a threat on our own. That night, sleep eluded us. We sat around the table in the station, poring over maps and debating our options. David suggested calling in reinforcements from other parks or even the military. But we knew that would take too much time. In the end, we decided to go back out at first light, this time with a plan to trap the creature. As dawn broke, we set out once more, our gear supplemented with hastily constructed traps and bait. We returned to the area where I had encountered the creature and set up our snares, then settled in to wait. Hours passed with no sign of our quarry. Just as we were about to give up, we heard it, a low, guttural sound that was part growl, part something entirely inhuman. The creature appeared at the edge of the clearing, those eerie glowing eyes fixed upon us with what I can only describe as malevolent intelligence. We stood our ground, weapons at the ready as it began to move toward our traps. For a moment, I dared to hope that our plan would work, but the creature was far more cunning than we had given it credit for. It nimbly avoided our traps and came straight for us with frightening speed. We opened fire, the sound of our weapons deafening in the quiet of the forest. Our bullets seemed to slow it down but not stop it entirely. It reached David first, its elongated fingers slashing at him with razor-sharp precision. He went down with a scream of agony. Sarah and I continued firing, trying desperately to drive it away from our fallen comrade. The creature turned its attention to Sarah next, knocking her to the ground with a sweeping blow. In that moment of desperation, I took careful aim and fired at its head, praying to hit something vital. The shot connected, and the creature stumbled backward, giving me just enough time to grab Sarah and pull her to safety. David was bleeding profusely, but still alive. We retreated as quickly as we could, half carrying, half dragging David between us. To our immense relief, the creature did not pursue us. It stood at the edge of the clearing, those glowing eyes watching our retreat with an almost contemplative air. We made it back to the station and immediately called for emergency medical evacuation. David was airlifted to the nearest hospital, his condition critical but stable. In the days and weeks that followed, an extensive search was conducted in the area, but no trace of the creature was ever found. The authorities, unable or unwilling to accept our fantastic story, officially attributed the incident to an attack by an unidentified large predator, possibly a bear. But we knew the truth. We knew what we had seen, what we had fought against in those dark woods, and we knew it was still out there, lurking in the shadows. David survived his injuries, but he was never quite the same afterward. The trauma of the attack left deep psychological scars, and he eventually transferred to a less demanding position at the park's visitor center. Sarah stuck it out for a few months, but ultimately decided to leave her job as a ranger altogether. She moved to Columbus, taking a position with the state's Environmental Protection Agency, as far from the deep woods as she could get while still working in conservation. As for me, I couldn't bring myself to leave. This forest, for better or worse, had become a part of me. I felt a responsibility to stay, to keep watch, to make sure that thing, whatever it was, didn't claim any more victims. Life in the park goes on. We've repaired and expanded the trail system, put up new warning signs, and implemented stricter protocols for hikers venturing into the backcountry. But deep down, I know it's not enough. That creature is still out there somewhere in the vast expanse of Hocking Hills. I've thought about quitting more times than I can count, about finding a nice, safe job far away from any forest. But this place, this calling, it's in my blood now. So I stay. Despite the fear, despite the memories that haunt my dreams, I stay. Because someone has to keep watch. Someone has to make sure it doesn't take anyone else. I still have Richard Simmons' notebook locked away in my desk drawer. Sometimes on particularly dark nights when the wind whispers through the trees outside my cabin, I take it out and reread his frantic scribblings. I search for some clue, some insight into what that creature might be and where it came from. But the answers remain elusive, lost in the ramblings of a man whose mind was fracturing under the weight of an impossible reality. These days, when I'm out on patrol, I keep my eyes and ears open, always alert, always watching. Sometimes, when I'm deep in the woods alone, I think I can hear it, a rustle in the undergrowth, a shadow that seems to move just at the edge of my vision. It's probably just my imagination playing tricks on me, the result of that traumatic encounter. But I can't shake the feeling that it's out there, watching, waiting. And so, I continue my vigil. I walk the trails, I warn the visitors, and I keep my rifle close at hand. Because I know that somewhere in these ancient woods, in the deepest, darkest hollow where the sun never quite reaches, something is waiting. Something with glowing eyes and an otherworldly hunger. And as long as I draw breath, I'll be here, standing guard against the watcher in the woods. My name is Luke Price, and I've been a park ranger for the last 10 years. At 66 years old, I've seen more than my fair share of strange occurrences in the wilderness, but nothing could have prepared me for what happened last fall in the Mount Baker Snoqualmie National Forest. Growing up in rural Washington, I spent more time among the towering evergreens than inside my family's modest home. It seemed only natural to turn my love for the outdoors into a career. The Pacific Northwest has always been my home, its misty forests and rugged mountains a constant source of wonder and respect. I've encountered many things during my tenure as a ranger, from lost hikers to aggressive wildlife, but the events of last October shook me to my core. It's the kind of tale you'd expect to hear around a campfire, but I swear on my life that every word of this is true. It all began on what should have been a routine patrol. The area I work in is vast and largely untouched, a sprawling wilderness that can swallow you whole if you're not careful. That day I was partnered with Rita Cho, a fellow ranger and good friend. Rita's a compact woman with a sharp wit and an even sharper eye for detail. We'd been called out to investigate reports of strange noises coming from deep within the forest. As we drove our battered Forest Service truck along the winding dirt roads, Rita couldn't resist a bit of playful speculation. "So, Luke," she said with a grin, "think we're on the trail of Sasquatch today?" I chuckled, shaking my head. "Nah, Probably just some campers who had one too many and got spooked by an owl. You know how it goes. We reached the trailhead and began our hike into the dense forest. The woods were unnaturally quiet, the silence hanging heavy in the air like a thick fog. It was odd, but I brushed it off as just another quirk of the forest. After about an hour of hiking, we came across the campsite where the noises had been reported. What we found made my blood run cold. The site was in complete disarray. Tents were shredded, food and gear scattered everywhere as if a tornado had torn through. But there was no sign of the campers themselves. "Luke, look at this," Rita called, kneeling by some unusual tracks in the soft earth. They were like nothing I'd ever seen before, large, deep impressions with what looked like claw marks at the edges. "Those aren't bear tracks," I muttered, crouching down for a closer look. "Too big. And the stride, it's almost like whatever made these was walking on two legs." We decided to follow the tracks more out of a sense of duty than any real desire to see where they led. The path took us deeper into the forest, where the trees grew so dense they blotted out most of the sunlight. The air grew colder, and an uneasy feeling settled in the pit of my stomach. "Luke," Rita whispered, her voice tense, "do you ever get the feeling we're being watched?" I nodded grimly. "Yeah, I'm feeling it now." The forest seemed alive with shadows and movements just beyond our peripheral vision, but we pressed on, determined to solve the mystery. The tracks led us to a small clearing, and what we found there made my skin crawl. There were more tracks, many more, and in the center of the clearing, a large mound of earth had been disturbed. It looked as if something had been buried and then dug up again. "We need to call this in," I said, my voice tight with urgency. Rita nodded, her usual cheerful demeanor replaced by grim determination. "Agreed. This is way above our pay grade." As we turned to leave, a sound stopped us in our tracks. It was a low, guttural noise, almost like a growl, but not quite like any animal I'd ever heard. We froze, listening intently. The sound came again, closer this time. Rita reached for her radio to call for backup, but before she could, something burst from the trees. The creature that emerged was like nothing I'd ever seen or imagined. It stood easily 7 feet tall with a hunched posture and long, gangly limbs. Its skin was a sickly pale color stretched tight over its bones, and its eyes, its eyes, glowed a nauseating yellow in the dim light. The creature moved with an unnatural grace, almost gliding across the ground toward us. For a moment we stood paralyzed with fear. Then instinct kicked in. "Run!" I shouted, and we took off back down the trail. We didn't stop until we reached the truck, our lungs burning and hearts pounding. We radioed in our report as we sped back to headquarters, but by the time backup arrived, there was no sign of the creature. The tracks were gone, and the campsite looked just as we'd left it, with no evidence of the horror we'd witnessed. Our supervisor, Marcus Blackwood, listened to our story with obvious skepticism. "You two sure you didn't just spook each other out there?" he asked, tone more mocking than concerned. "Marcus, we know what we saw," Rita insisted, her voice firm despite her obvious exhaustion. "That thing is out there." "Well, until we have more than a wild story and some weird tracks, there's not much we can do," Marcus replied with a shrug. "But I'll keep this on record, just in case." Days passed, and things seemed to return to normal. But Rita and I couldn't shake the memory of what we'd seen. We kept a watchful eye during our patrols, half expecting the creature to appear again at any moment. Then, a couple of weeks later, a hiker went missing. Her name was Sophia Chen, an experienced backpacker who'd been hiking alone in the same area where we'd encountered the creature. Search teams were dispatched, but there was no trace of her. Rita and I joined the search, hoping against hope that we wouldn't find any more of those unnatural tracks. As we combed through the dense undergrowth, I couldn't shake the feeling that we were being watched again. The hairs on the back of my neck stood on end, and every snapping twig or rustle of leaves made me jump. "Luke, over here," Rita's voice cut through my nervous thoughts. I hurried over to where she was standing near a rocky outcropping. There, half buried under leaves and dirt, was a torn piece of fabric. It matched the description of the shirt Sophia had been wearing when she disappeared. We radioed in our find, and the search intensified in that area. Hours passed with no other signs, and as the sun began to set, the team leader decided to call it a day and regroup in the morning. But Rita and I stayed behind, not ready to give up just yet. We set up a small camp, planning to continue our search at first light. As night fell, the forest around us seemed to come alive with sounds. Twigs snapping, leaves rustling, and occasionally a distant cry that could have been an animal or something else. "Remember that horror movie we watched last month?" Rita asked, trying to lighten the mood. "The one where the campers get picked off one by one?" "Yeah, let's not go there," I replied, forcing a laugh. "This is real life, Rita. We'll be fine." We settled in for the night, taking turns keeping watch. Around midnight I heard it again, that low, guttural sound we'd heard in the clearing. My heart started pounding as I woke Rita. "It's back," I whispered, my voice barely audible. We grabbed our flashlights and shone them into the trees. For a moment, there was nothing but the dark shapes of the forest. Then, just at the edge of the light, we saw it. The creature was standing perfectly still, watching us with those glowing yellow eyes. "Rita, get the flare gun," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. She fumbled in her pack, finally pulling out the gun and aiming it at the creature. The flare shot into the sky, casting an eerie red glow over everything. The creature hissed and retreated into the shadows. "We need to move." "Now," Rita said, grabbing our gear. We didn't bother packing up, just took what we could carry and started back toward the truck. The forest seemed to close in around us, every sound amplified in the darkness. We could hear the creature following, keeping just out of sight. Finally, we broke through the trees and saw the truck up ahead. Relief washed over me, but it was short-lived. The creature lunged out of the shadows, knocking Rita to the ground. She screamed, trying to fend it off as it clawed at her. "Rita!" I yelled, pulling my hunting knife from my belt. I ran at the creature, slashing at it with the blade. It turned on me, its yellow eyes burning with fury. I felt a searing pain as it raked its claws across my chest, but I didn't stop. I kept slashing, finally driving the blade deep into its side. The creature let out a horrible screech and fled into the woods, leaving a trail of dark, viscous blood behind. I collapsed next to Rita, panting and bleeding. "You okay?" I asked, my voice shaky. "I've been better," she replied with a weak laugh. "Let's get out of here." We managed to get to the truck and drove back to the ranger station. We were both treated for our injuries, and this time the higher-ups were forced to take our story seriously. A search team was sent out the next day, but the creature was gone. All they found were more strange tracks and the remains of Sophia Chen, half buried near the clearing where we'd first seen the tracks. The official report called it an animal attack. But Rita and I knew better. We never spoke about it publicly, but among ourselves we called it the Wendigo, a name from Native American folklore, a creature of the forest that preys on humans. Life went on, but things were never quite the same. Rita and I still work as rangers, but we're more cautious now, more aware of the things that might be lurking in the shadows of the forest. And every so often, late at night, I hear that low, guttural sound and wonder if it's come back, looking for us. We never saw the creature again, but the memory of that night stays with me. It's a reminder that there are things out there we don't understand, things that can't be explained away by science or reason. So if you're ever out in the woods and you hear something strange, trust your instincts. You never know what might be watching from just beyond the firelight. As for Rita, she eventually transferred to another park, hoping for a quieter life. We keep in touch, swapping stories and sometimes laughing about that night. But deep down, we both know there's nothing funny about it. It's a part of us now, a shared secret that we carry with us. And if anyone ever asks why I still patrol the woods despite everything that happened, I just smile and say, someone's got to keep an eye out for the Wendigo. Life as a ranger isn't easy, but it's the life I chose. And despite everything, I wouldn't trade it for anything. The forest is my home, and I'll keep it safe no matter what. Because out there somewhere, I know the Wendigo is watching, waiting for the right moment to strike again. And when it does, I'll be ready. My name is Andrew Young, and I am 70 years old. I've been a park ranger at Blackwood National Forest in Idaho for the past 15 years. Most people think a job like mine is all about serene landscapes and peaceful walks through the woods, and most of the time, they'd be right. I spend my days educating hikers, checking trails, and making sure our little corner of nature stays pristine. I've got a wife, Eleanor, and a teenage son, Max, who roll their eyes every time I start a story with, "Back when I was out in the woods." But this one, I've never told them. It's not your typical ranger tale. What I'm about to share will make you question everything you thought you knew about the natural world and the creatures that inhabit it. It all started on an unusually warm fall day, the kind that makes you think summer isn't quite ready to let go. The leaves were just beginning to turn, splashing the forest with hints of gold and crimson. I was out doing a routine check on some of the more isolated trails, the ones that don't see much foot traffic. My buddy Max Holloway, another ranger, was supposed to meet me later to help clear some debris that had been reported blocking part of the Aspen Ridge Trail. I was about a mile in when I noticed something strange. The forest was quiet, too quiet. Normally, you'd hear the rustling of squirrels, the chirping of birds, even the occasional rustle of a deer. But that day there was nothing, just the crunch of my boots on the path and the whisper of wind through the trees. I remember thinking maybe a predator was nearby, a mountain lion or something. It wasn't unheard of, but it was rare enough to put me on edge. I radioed Max to see where he was. "Hey Max, you close? It's weirdly quiet out here, man," I said, my voice sounding unnaturally loud in the stillness. "Just about there, Vic. Hold tight," Max replied, his voice crackling through the static. I decided to keep moving forward, figuring Max would catch up soon. That's when I saw it. A deep gouge in one of the towering pines. It wasn't a claw mark from a bear or a cat. It was more like something had ripped into it with incredible force, leaving a gaping wound in the bark. The exposed wood was pale, almost white, contrasting sharply with the dark, rough exterior. The hairs on the back of my neck stood up. I called Max again, my voice tight with tension. "Max, you gotta see this. It's like something shredded this tree. Never seen anything like it." "On my way," he said, sounding more serious this time. As I stood there waiting, I started to feel uneasy. It was that gut feeling you get when you know something's off but can't quite put your finger on it. The silence seemed to press in around me, heavy and oppressive. I found myself straining to hear any sound, any sign of life in the forest. Then I heard it, a faint rustling in the underbrush followed by a low, almost imperceptible hum. It was unlike anything I'd ever heard before, not quite mechanical, not quite organic. It set my teeth on edge and made my skin crawl. My hand went to the can of bear spray on my belt. Not much, but it was something. Max arrived a few minutes later, puffing slightly from the hike. He was a big guy, built like a linebacker, with a thick beard and kind eyes, but right now those eyes were wide with shock as he took in the damaged tree. "What the hell, Vic? That tree looks like it went through a shredder," he said, running a hand over his beard. "I know," I said, holding up a hand for silence. The hum had stopped, but the eerie quiet remained. "Did you hear anything on your way up here? Any animals?" Max shook his head slowly. "Now that you mention it, no. It's like the whole forest just shut down." We decided to follow the path deeper into the forest, our curiosity piqued and a sense of duty urging us on. As we walked, we started finding more signs of something, branches broken in ways that didn't make sense, strange tracks that neither of us could identify. They were almost like human footprints, but elongated and with what looked like claw marks at the tips. Max, always the joker, tried to lighten the mood. "Maybe Bigfoot's been hitting the gym, huh?" he said with a forced chuckle. I managed a weak smile, but I could tell he was just as uneasy as I was. There was something fundamentally wrong about all of this. In all my years as a ranger, I'd never seen anything like it. We walked for another half hour, the trail becoming less and less distinct. The trees seemed to press in closer, their branches reaching out like gnarled fingers. The light took on a strange quality, filtered through the canopy in a way that made everything look slightly off, like we'd stepped into some twisted fairy tale version of our familiar forest. Finally, we reached a small clearing. In the middle of it, we saw something that made our blood run cold. A tent, or what was left of it, shredded and scattered like confetti. There were no signs of its occupants, just a couple of backpacks, also torn open with their contents strewn about. It looked like someone or something had gone through them in a hurry. I picked up a wallet lying in the dirt, my hand shaking slightly. The ID inside belonged to a Michael Carpenter from Boise. "Max, we need to call this in." "People are missing," I said, already reaching for my radio. Before I could make the call, we heard that hum again, louder this time, coming from the trees behind us. We turned around slowly, our eyes scanning the dense forest, and then we saw it. At first, it was just a shadow, a vague outline that seemed to shift and change as we looked at it. But as it stepped into the clearing, the details became horrifyingly clear. It was humanoid, but not human. Its skin was a mottled grey, stretched tight over a skeletal frame that seemed too tall, too thin to be natural. Limbs that were just a bit too long, joints that bent in ways they shouldn't. But it was the face that haunted me. Eyes like black voids, impossibly deep and dark, staring right at us. It had no mouth, but the hum seemed to emanate from its entire body, vibrating the air around it. The creature cocked its head as if studying us, and I felt a wave of cold dread wash over me. This was something ancient, something that didn't belong in our world. Max and I stood frozen, unable to move or speak. Time seemed to stretch, seconds feeling like hours, as we stared at the impossible being before us. Then, with a sudden burst of speed that belied its gangly frame, it lunged at Max. Max barely had time to scream before it was on him. I watched in horror as it tore into him with its long, clawed fingers. Blood sprayed, and Max's screams echoed through the trees, a sound of pure terror and agony that I knew would haunt my nightmares for years to come. I snapped out of my paralysis and fumbled for the bear spray, my hands shaking so badly I could barely grip the canister. I managed to hit the creature with a full blast, but it barely seemed to notice. It turned its head toward me, those black eyes boring into my soul, and I felt a wave of alien consciousness brush against my mind. In that moment, I understood that this thing wasn't just a predator. It was something else entirely, something our human minds couldn't begin to comprehend. I did the only thing I could think of. I ran. I ran like I'd never run before, crashing through the underbrush, not caring about the cuts and scrapes from branches and thorns. I could hear it behind me, the hum growing louder, but I didn't dare look back. My lungs burned, my legs felt like lead, but I kept going. I had to reach the ranger station, had to get help. Bursting out of the forest, I stumbled onto the main trail and nearly collapsed. Another hiker, a young guy I'd later learn was named Alex Tanner, saw me and rushed over. "Jesus, man, what happened?" he asked, grabbing my arm to steady me. "No time to explain," I gasped, my heart pounding so hard I thought it might burst out of my chest. "We need to get to the station, now." Alex didn't argue. We made it to the station, and I slammed the door behind us, bolting it shut. I grabbed the radio and called for backup, my voice shaking uncontrollably. "Mayday, mayday! This is Ranger Andrew Brooks at Blackwood Station. We have an emergency. Max Holloway is down and there's something out there. We need help. Now." The response was immediate. Other rangers and local authorities mobilized quickly, and within the hour, the area was swarming with law enforcement and search teams. They found Max's body, or what was left of it. The sight was grisly, and I had to look away. The memory of my friend's final moments was seared into my brain, a horror I knew I'd never be able to shake. The search for the creature turned up nothing. No tracks, no signs, nothing. It was as if it had vanished into thin air. The forest, which had been so silent, seemed to come back to life as the sun set, the usual sounds of nature returning as if nothing had happened. I gave my statement, recounting everything I'd seen, but I could tell by the looks on their faces that they were skeptical. I couldn't blame them. If I hadn't seen it myself, I wouldn't have believed it either. They chalked Max's death up to a bear attack, despite the lack of evidence to support it. No one wanted to entertain the idea of something unknown lurking in the forest. I took a leave of absence after that, spent a lot of time with Eleanor and Max's family, trying to process what had happened. I didn't sleep well for weeks, haunted by the image of that thing and Max's final moments. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw those black voids staring back at me, felt that alien touch on my mind. The forest called me back eventually. It's my home, my sanctuary, and I couldn't stay away forever. But I'm more cautious now. I stick to the well-traveled paths, and I'm never out there alone. I've tried to forget what happened, to move on, but some things you just can't shake. Sometimes late at night, when the world is quiet and I'm alone with my thoughts, I think I hear that hum again, faint and distant, reminding me that some things are best left unexplored. Life goes on and the forest remains, but I'm not the same man I was. I've seen something that defies explanation, something that makes me question everything I thought I knew about the world. And maybe that's the scariest part of all, that there are things out there, lurking in the shadows, that we may never understand. Things that watch us from the darkness, thus waiting for their moment to strike. But my story doesn't end there. Oh no, that was just the beginning. The encounter with that thing in the forest was only the first ripple in a pond of strangeness that would soon engulf my life. As I tried to piece together what had happened, to make sense of the insensible, I found myself drawn deeper into a world I never knew existed. A world where the lines between reality and nightmare blur. It started small. A few weeks after the incident, I noticed strange symbols carved into trees near the ranger station. They weren't like anything I'd seen before. Not graffiti or trail markers, but intricate, swirling designs that seemed to shift and change if you looked at them too long. I tried to photograph them, but every picture came out blurry, as if the symbols themselves were refusing to be captured. Then came the dreams. Night after night, I found myself back in that clearing, reliving the horror of Max's death. But in these dreams, the creature spoke to me, not with words, but with images and sensations that flooded my mind. I saw impossible geometries, vast cosmic landscapes that hurt to look at, and always those black, empty eyes staring into my soul. I woke from these dreams drenched in sweat, my heart racing and my mind reeling from visions I couldn't begin to comprehend. Eleanor was worried sick about me, but how could I explain? How could I tell her that every night I was communing with something that shouldn't exist? As the weeks turned into months, I started noticing other strange occurrences in the forest. Hikers reported hearing weird noises, like a low hum or vibration that seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere at once. Animals were found dead with no apparent cause, their bodies twisted into unnatural shapes. And there were the disappearances. Not many, but enough to be noticeable. People would go into the forest and simply never come out. I tried to warn my superiors, to make them see that something was terribly wrong in Blackwood National Forest, but they didn't want to hear it. Tourism was up. Ironically enough, it seemed that rumors of strange occurrences had turned our quiet corner of Idaho into a hotspot for thrill-seekers and paranormal enthusiasts. One day, about 6 months after my encounter, I met someone who would change everything. Her name was Dr. Evelyn Marsh, a cryptozoologist who had come to Blackwood to investigate the recent string of anomalies. At first, I was skeptical. I'd dealt with enough UFO hunters and Bigfoot chasers to last a lifetime. But there was something different about Dr. Marsh. She listened to my story without judgment, her keen green eyes taking in every detail. "Mr. Brooks," she said when I'd finished recounting my experience, "what you encountered isn't unique to Blackwood. There have been similar sightings all over the world throughout history. What you saw, we call them the Pale Ones." I felt a chill run down my spine at the name. "What are they?" I asked, not sure I wanted to know the answer. Dr. Marsh's expression was grim. "We're not entirely sure. Some believe they're interdimensional beings. Others think they're some kind of highly evolved predator that's managed to stay hidden from humanity. What we do know is that they're dangerous, and they're becoming more active." Over the next few weeks, Dr. Marsh and I worked together, combing through old reports, interviewing witnesses, and exploring some of the more remote areas of the forest. We found more of those strange symbols, always in places where the veil between our world and whatever lay beyond seemed thinnest. But it wasn't until we ventured deep into the heart of the forest, to a place the local Native American tribes had long considered taboo, that we truly began to understand the scope of what we were dealing with. It was a cave, hidden behind a waterfall that wasn't on any of our maps. The entrance was narrow, barely wide enough for a person to squeeze through, but it opened up into a vast chamber that took our breath away. The walls were covered in paintings, some so old they were little more than faded smears of pigment, others so fresh the paint was still wet. They told a story, a history of encounters between humans and the Pale Ones stretching back thousands of years. There were depictions of rituals, of sacrifices made to appease these entities, and there in the center of it all was an image that made my blood run cold, a tall skeletal figure with black empty eyes, the same creature I had seen in the forest. As we stood there, trying to process what we were seeing, we heard it, that familiar hum growing louder by the second. Dr. Marsh and I looked at each other, our flashlights trembling in our hands. "We need to leave," I said, my voice barely above a whisper now. But it was too late. The hum had become a deafening roar, and the air itself seemed to ripple and distort. And then they appeared. Not one, but dozens of the Pale Ones, materializing out of thin air, their black eyes fixed on us with an intensity that froze me to the spot. What happened next is still a blur. I remember Dr. Marsh shouting something, her voice lost in the cacophony of alien sounds. I remember running, stumbling through the darkness of the cave, the scrabble of inhuman feet behind us. And I remember emerging into the sunlight, gasping for air, certain that at any moment cold skeletal hands would close around my throat. But they didn't follow us out of the cave. When we finally dared to look back, the entrance had vanished, as if it had never existed at all. Dr. Marsh and I made our way back to civilization in silence, both of us trying to come to terms with what we'd seen. It was only when we reached the ranger station, the familiar surroundings grounding us somewhat, that we dared to speak about our experience. "What do we do now?" I asked, my voice hoarse from the ordeal. Dr. Marsh ran a hand through her disheveled hair, her face pale but determined. "We need to tell someone. This is bigger than us, Andrew. Much bigger." But who would believe us? We had no evidence, no proof of what we'd seen. The cave had vanished, taking with it any chance of documenting our discovery. We were left with nothing but our memories and a growing sense of dread. Over the next few weeks, Dr. Marsh and I tried to continue our research, but it was clear that our encounter in the cave had changed things. The forest felt different now, as if it was holding its breath, waiting for something. The strange occurrences increased in frequency and intensity. More and more hikers went missing, their belongings found scattered and torn, just like that first campsite I'd discovered with Max. And then there were the dreams. Every night, I found myself back in that cave, surrounded by the Pale Ones. But now, instead of just observing, they seemed to be trying to communicate. Images and sensations flooded my mind, visions of other worlds, of vast cosmic entities beyond human comprehension. I saw the history of our planet from their perspective, watched as they shaped and influenced human civilization from the shadows. I woke each morning exhausted, my mind reeling from information it couldn't possibly process. Dr. Marsh was experiencing similar dreams, and we spent hours comparing notes, trying to make sense of what we were being shown. It was during one of these sessions that we had our breakthrough. We realized that the symbols we'd been seeing throughout the forest weren't just random markings, they were a language, a way of communicating across dimensions. With our newfound understanding, we began to decipher their message. What we uncovered was terrifying. The Pale Ones weren't just visiting our world, they were preparing to invade it. The increase in activity, the disappearances, it was all part of a larger plan. They were testing our defenses, probing for weaknesses in the fabric of reality. Armed with this knowledge, we knew we had to act. But who would believe us? We needed proof, something tangible that we could show to the authorities. And so, against our better judgment, we decided to venture back into the forest, back to where it all began. We set out at dawn, our backpacks loaded with cameras, sensors, and every piece of scientific equipment Dr. Marsh could get her hands on. The forest was eerily quiet as we made our way deeper into its heart, following the trail of symbols that only we could now understand. As we approached the area where I'd first encountered the Pale One, the air began to thicken, shimmering like a heat haze. Our equipment went haywire, needles spinning and screens flickering with impossible readings. And then we heard it, that familiar hum, growing louder with each passing second. "Andrew," Dr. Marsh said, her voice tight with fear, "I think we've made a terrible mistake." Warped and through the rifts, we saw them coming. Not just one or two, but an army of Pale Ones, their skeletal forms pouring through from whatever nightmarish dimension they called home. We ran. God help us, we ran as fast as we could, but it wasn't fast enough. I could feel them behind us, their alien presence pressing against my mind, trying to slow us down, to make us turn and face them. I don't know how we made it back to the ranger station. Everything after that is a blur of alarms, of panicked radio calls, of trying to explain to disbelieving colleagues what was coming for us all. By the time the military arrived, it was almost too late. The Pale Ones had spread beyond the forest, their influence seeping into nearby towns. People were changing, their eyes growing dark and empty, their bodies twisting into pale, elongated shapes. The battle that followed was like nothing I could have imagined. Human weapons seemed to have little effect on the Pale Ones, passing through them as if they were made of smoke. But they had no such limitations. I watched in horror as soldiers were torn apart by invisible forces, their screams cut short as they were dragged into rifts in reality. Dr. Marsh and I did what we could, using our limited understanding of the Pale One's language to try and close the portals they were using to enter our world. It was desperate, dangerous work, and more than once, I thought we were done for. In the end, it was Dr. Marsh who saved us all. She realized that the symbols, the language of the Pale Ones, could be used against them. With the help of a team of linguists and physicists, she created a device that broadcast a signal in their own language, a command to retreat, to return to their own dimension. The effect was immediate and terrifying. The Pale Ones writhed and twisted, their forms blurring as they were forcibly pulled back through the rifts. The air was filled with an unearthly shrieking as they fought against the command, but in the end, they couldn't resist. As suddenly as it had begun, it was over. The rifts closed, the hum faded, and the forest was left in eerie silence. The cost had been high, too high. Hundreds were dead or missing, and those who survived were changed forever by what they'd seen. In the aftermath, the government did what governments do. They covered it up. Blackwood National Forest was declared a restricted area, officially due to environmental concerns. Those of us who knew the truth were sworn to secrecy, our silence bought with threats and promises in equal measure. But secrets have a way of getting out. Rumors spread, conspiracy theories flourished, and deep in the forest, in places where the boundary between worlds is still thin, the symbols remain, waiting for someone else to unlock their terrible meaning. As for me, I couldn't stay. The forest that had been my home for so long now felt alien and threatening. I retired, moved away with Eleanor and Max, and tried to build a new life far from the shadows of Blackwood. But I can't escape the memories or the dreams. Every night I find myself back in that cave, surrounded by those ancient paintings, and in the darkness I hear the hum growing louder, coming closer. I wake in a cold sweat, my heart pounding, and I wonder, did we really stop them, or did we just delay the inevitable? Because deep down, I know the truth. The Pale Ones are still out there, watching, waiting, and someday they'll be back. When that day comes, will we be ready, or will we finally learn the terrible price of our curiosity, of daring to peer behind the veil of reality? Only time will tell. But until then, I'll be here, keeping watch, ready to sound the alarm, because someone has to remember. Someone has to be prepared. The forest may be silent now, but the whispers in the darkness are growing louder, and the Pale Ones are getting restless. I've always had a knack for finding the perfect spot to park my RV for a weekend getaway. This time, I had settled into a quiet area near Blackwater Creek, far enough from the main campsite to enjoy some solitude, but not too isolated. I had my fishing gear, a good book, and enough supplies to last a few days. Just me and the great outdoors. That's how I like it. My name's Noah Holloway. I've been camping all over the country, seeking out the hidden gems of nature. I had a rough patch a few years back. Lost my wife to cancer. The trips are a way to clear my head, to find some peace away from the memories that seem to haunt every corner of my house. That day started like any other. I woke up with the sun, brewed some coffee over the fire, and took a moment to appreciate the silence. By mid-morning, I was out on the creek with my fishing rod, the line lazily drifting with the current. It was around noon when things started to get strange. A woman showed up at the edge of the clearing, tall, gaunt, with wild, unkempt hair and tattered clothes. She looked like she'd been living rough for a while. I gave her a nod, expecting the usual camper-to-camper small talk, but she just stood there, staring. After a moment, she walked off into the woods without saying a word. Weird, but I shrugged it off. People come out here for all sorts of reasons. The afternoon wore on, and I didn't think much more about it. I headed back to the RV, grilled some fish for lunch, and settled in for a nap. I must have dozed off longer than I intended, because when I woke up, the light was starting to fade. That's when I noticed the footprints. Muddy prints leading from the creek up to my RV and then disappearing back into the woods. Unease began to creep in. I decided to secure the RV for the night. I locked all the doors and windows, checked my supplies, and made sure my flashlight was working. By the time I finished, it was dark. I sat inside, listening to the sounds of the forest, trying to convince myself that everything was fine. But there was something off, an unsettling quiet that seemed to swallow every noise. Around midnight, I heard a rustling outside. I grabbed my flashlight and peered through the window. Nothing, just trees and shadows. I sat back down, telling myself it was probably a raccoon or some other critter, but the noise persisted and it was getting closer. Suddenly, the door handle jiggled. My heart skipped a beat. I quietly moved to the door, my flashlight in one hand and a knife in the other. The handle stopped moving and there was a brief silence before a loud bang against the door. I jumped back, heart racing. I called out, trying to keep my voice steady. No answer. Another bang, this one harder. I pressed my ear to the door, listening intently, heavy breathing. Someone was definitely out there. I stepped back, contemplating my options. I could wait it out, hoping they'd leave, or I could confront whoever was outside. I chose the latter, figuring the element of surprise might work in my favor. I yanked the door open and shone the flashlight into the darkness. The wild-haired woman from earlier stood there, her face twisted with some wild intensity. She had a crowbar in one hand, raised as if ready to strike. For a split second, we locked eyes, and then she lunged at me. Instinct took over. I swung the flashlight, catching her on the side of the head. She stumbled but didn't go down. I followed up with a quick jab to her gut with the knife. She grunted, dropping the crowbar and clutching her stomach. Blood seeped through her fingers and she staggered back, collapsing onto the ground. My heart was pounding so hard I could barely hear anything else. I kicked the crowbar away and kept the flashlight trained on her. "What the hell do you want?" I shouted. She didn't respond, just lay there, gasping for breath. I wasn't sure what to do next. Call the cops? Out here, it could take them hours to arrive. I needed to restrain her, keep her from causing any more trouble. I ran back inside and grabbed some rope from my supplies. When I returned, she was gone. Bloodstains marked where she'd been lying, leading off into the woods. I swore under my breath. I couldn't just let her get away, not knowing what she might do next. I grabbed my flashlight, knife, and a first aid kit, then headed into the trees, following the trail of blood. The forest was dense, and the undergrowth made progress slow. I kept my light low, trying to stay as quiet as possible. The blood trail was easy to follow at first, but it started to thin out after a while. I pressed on, hoping I wasn't walking into a trap. After what felt like an eternity, I heard movement up ahead. I crouched down, inching forward until I could see a small clearing. The woman was there, leaning against a tree, struggling to bandage her wound. She looked up as I approached, eyes wide with fear. "Stay back," she rasped. "I don't want any more trouble." "Then why did you come at me with a crowbar?" I demanded, keeping my distance. I thought you were one of them," she said, her voice weak. "Please, just let me go." I didn't trust her, but she didn't look like she was in any condition to fight. "Who do you think I am?" I asked, trying to keep her talking. She shook her head. "Doesn't matter now. They're coming. They're going to kill us all." "What are you talking about? Who's coming?" Before she could answer, there was a sharp crack from the trees. I barely had time to react before a bullet whizzed past my ear. I dove to the ground, rolling behind a tree for cover. The woman let out a strangled cry and went still. I peeked around the tree, scanning the darkness. I couldn't see the shooter, but I could hear footsteps approaching. I needed to move fast. I crawled through the underbrush, keeping low and quiet. Whoever was out there, they were hunting us both. I made my way back to the RV, my mind racing. Why would someone be out here, armed and dangerous? What had I stumbled into? I reached the clearing and bolted for the RV, slamming the door shut and locking it behind me. My hands were shaking as I fumbled for my phone. No signal, of course. I took a deep breath, trying to calm down. "Think, Noah, what's the plan?" I needed to defend myself, and the RV wasn't exactly a fortress. I grabbed my hunting rifle from its case, loaded it and positioned myself by the window, watching the tree line. Minutes dragged by. I kept scanning the area, looking for any sign of movement. My mind kept replaying the woman's words. They're going to kill us all. Who were they? What did they want? And why the hell were they out here? A rustling noise snapped me back to the present. I saw a figure moving through the trees, heading straight for the RV. I raised the rifle, heart pounding. The figure stepped into the clearing and I recognized him immediately. It was another camper I had seen earlier in the day, a guy named Marcus. He had a couple of kids with him, friendly enough when I met them, but now he looked different. Determined, like he knew exactly what he was doing. "Marcus," I called out, "stop right there." He froze, hands raised. "Noah, it's me. We need to talk." "Talk about what?" "There's no time to explain. Just let me in, please." Something in his voice made me hesitate. I lowered the rifle slightly but didn't open the door. "Start talking. Who are these people hunting us?" Marcus glanced over his shoulder, then back at me. "It's a long story. Short version, we stumbled onto something we shouldn't have. Now they're cleaning up loose ends. That woman you saw earlier? She was one of us, but she turned on us. So what do we do? First, we need to get out of here. They won't stop until we're all dead." I nodded, opening the door just enough for him to slip inside. He shut it quickly, locking it behind him. "We need to move now." "Is the RV ready to go?" "Yeah, but we can't just drive blindly." "Where do we go?" "There's a ranger station a few miles from here. If we can get there, we might be able to call for help." I didn't like it, but it was better than sitting here waiting to be picked off. I started the engine and we peeled out of the clearing, headlights cutting through the darkness. Marcus kept glancing back, as if expecting to see our pursuers at any moment. The road was rough, bouncing us around in our seats. I tried to keep my focus on the path ahead, but my mind was racing. Who were these people? Why were they so determined to kill us? We drove for what felt like hours, the forest closing in around us. Finally, we saw the lights of the ranger station up ahead. Relief washed over me, but it was short-lived. As we pulled up, we saw the doors hanging open, the windows shattered. "God," Marcus muttered, "we're too late." I parked the RV and grabbed my rifle, stepping out cautiously. The place looked ransacked, papers and supplies strewn everywhere. We moved inside, checking for any sign of life. Nothing. "There's a radio in the back," Marcus said. "If it's still working, we can call for help." I followed him to the back room, where a large radio set sat on a desk. Marcus fiddled with the dials, trying to get a signal. Static crackled, and then a voice came through, faint but clear. "This is Ranger Station Alpha. Who's there?" "Thank God," Marcus said. "We need help. We're being hunted." The voice on the other end paused. "We know. Stay where you are. Help is on the way." I exchanged a look with Marcus. "Do you trust them?" I asked. "Do we have a choice?" We barricaded ourselves in the back room, weapons at the ready. The minutes ticked by, each one feeling like an eternity. Finally, we heard the sound of approaching vehicles. I peeked out the window and saw a convoy of black SUVs pulling up. Men in tactical gear poured out, surrounding the building. "Hold your fire!" one of them shouted. "We're here to help." Marcus and I lowered our weapons as the men entered the station. They moved quickly, efficiently, securing the area. One of them, a tall man with a stern expression, approached us. "I'm Agent Rion," he said. "You're safe now." I wanted to believe him, but there were too many unanswered questions. "Who are you people?" I asked. "We're with a special task force," Rion explained. "We've been tracking this group for a while. You're lucky to be alive." Marcus and I exchanged a look. "What happens now?" I asked. Rion smiled faintly. "Now we get you out of here. You're coming with us." The ride out of the forest was tense. Rion explained that the group hunting us was involved in some sort of illegal operation, though he didn't go into details. They had been cleaning up loose ends, eliminating anyone who got too close. As we drove away, I couldn't help but think about the wild-haired woman, the one who had attacked me. She was just another victim in this twisted game, and now Marcus and I were caught up in it too. We eventually reached a safe house where we were debriefed and given new identities. They told us we would be safe, that the task force would handle everything. But as I lay in my new bed that night, I couldn't shake the feeling that it wasn't over, that somewhere out there, the people who had hunted us were still lurking, waiting for the right moment to strike again. I didn't sleep much that night, and when the sun rose, I knew one thing for sure. My days of quiet camping trips were over. The wilderness held too many secrets, too many dangers. From now on, I would keep to the safety of the known, the familiar, because sometimes the unknown is just too terrifying to face. But even as I tried to convince myself that I was safe, a nagging doubt lingered in the back of my mind. What if the task force wasn't what they claimed to be? What if this was all part of some larger, more sinister plan? The horror of that night in the woods had shaken me to my core, but it was the uncertainty of what lay ahead that truly terrified me. As the days turned into weeks and the weeks into months, I found myself constantly looking over my shoulder, jumping at every unexpected sound. The memories of that night haunted my dreams, and even in my waking hours, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched. Marcus and I kept in touch, sharing our paranoia and theories about what had really happened. We both felt that there was more to the story than what we'd been told. The task force's explanation seemed too neat, too convenient. One day, about 6 months after the incident, I received a cryptic message from Marcus. They lied to us. It's not over. Meet me at the old factory on 5th and Main. Come alone. My heart raced as I read the message. Part of me wanted to ignore it, to pretend I'd never seen it and continue living in blissful ignorance. But I knew I couldn't. Whatever was going on, I was already a part of it. I had to see this through to the end. As I drove to the meeting point, my mind raced with possibilities. What had Marcus discovered? Who had lied to us? And most importantly, what danger were we still in? The old factory loomed before me, a hulking silhouette against the setting sun. I parked my car a block away and approached on foot, every sense on high alert. As I neared the building, I heard a muffled sound coming from inside. It sounded like screaming. My blood ran cold. I should have called for help, should have turned and run. But something compelled me forward. I had to know the truth, no matter how terrifying it might be. I crept into the factory, the rusted machinery casting eerie shadows in the fading light. The screaming had stopped, replaced by an oppressive silence. I moved deeper into the building, my heart pounding so loudly I was sure it would give me away. And then I saw it. In the center of the factory floor, illuminated by a single shaft of light from a broken window, was a sight that would haunt me for the rest of my days. Marcus was there, strapped to a chair, his face a mask of terror. Standing over him was Agent Reen, a cruel smile twisting his features. Surrounding them both were figures I recognized from that night in the woods. The wild-haired woman, now composed and coldly efficient, and others I had glimpsed only in the darkness. "Ah," Noah reared and said, turning to face me, "So glad you could join us. Now we can begin." As the group closed in around me, I realized with horrifying clarity that our ordeal in the woods had been just the beginning. The true horror was only now unfolding, and I was powerless to stop it. The last thing I remember before the darkness took me was the sound of Reen's laughter echoing through the empty factory like the tolling of a funeral bell. Whatever nightmare awaited us, I knew that the terrors of Blackwater Creek were far from over. The darkness that enveloped me was absolute, but the silence was worse. I don't know how long I was unconscious, but when I came to, I found myself strapped to a chair next to Marcus. The factory floor was now brightly lit, revealing a nightmarish scene. Reen stood before us, flanked by the wild-haired woman and several other figures in dark clothing. Behind them I could see an array of advanced equipment, computers, strange machines, and what looked like medical apparatus. "Welcome back, Noah," Reen said, his voice dripping with false warmth. "I'm sure you have questions. Allow me to enlighten you." He paced back and forth, clearly relishing the moment. "What you and Marcus stumbled upon in Blackwater Creek was more than just some illegal operation. We are on the brink of something extraordinary, something that will change the very fabric of reality." Marcus stirred beside me, groaning. What are you talking about?" Reen's eyes gleamed with a fervor that sent a chill down my spine. "Interdimensional travel, gentlemen. We've discovered tiers in the fabric of our world, gateways to other realities. But these gateways, they're unstable. They require a catalyst to fully open." The wild-haired woman stepped forward, her face now eerily calm. "That's where you come in," she said. "Human consciousness, especially consciousness altered by fear and trauma, can act as that catalyst." The horror of what they were saying began to sink in. "You've been, terrorizing innocent people to power your sick experiments?" I spat out. Reen laughed. "Innocent? Hardly. Everyone we've chosen has a part to play, including you two. Your experiences in the woods, the fear you felt, it was all carefully orchestrated to prepare you for this moment." He nodded to one of his associates, who wheeled over a machine that looked like a cross between an MRI scanner and an electric chair. "This device will harness the energy of your fear, your trauma, to open a stable gateway. You should be honored. You'll be the first to witness what lies beyond." As they began to wheel the machine closer, I felt panic rising in my chest. I struggled against my restraints, but it was useless. Beside me, Marcus had gone pale, his eyes wide with terror. Suddenly, a deafening alarm blared through the factory. Reen's head snapped up, his composure cracking for the first time. "What's happening?" barked one of his associates. A man ran over from a bank of computers. "Sir, we have a problem. The gateway, it's opening on its own." A low rumble began to build, and I could feel the air around us becoming charged with an otherworldly energy. In the center of the room, the air itself seemed to ripple and tear, revealing a swirling vortex of impossible colors. Reen's face lit up with maniacal glee. "It's happening! Quick, prepare the—" But his words were cut short as tentacle-like appendages burst from the vortex, whipping through the air with impossible speed. The wild-haired woman screamed as one of the tentacles wrapped around her waist, dragging her toward the portal. Chaos erupted. Reen and his team scrambled to control the situation, but it was clear they were out of their depth. The tentacles lashed out indiscriminately, smashing equipment and grabbing at anything within reach. In the pandemonium, I felt my restraints loosen. Looking over, I saw Marcus had managed to free one hand and was working on untying me. "Come on," he hissed. "We need to get out of here." We stumbled to our feet, dodging the thrashing tentacles and panicked researchers. Reen saw us escaping and lunged toward us, his face contorted with rage. "No, you can't leave. We're so close." But as he reached for us, a tentacle wrapped around his leg, yanking him off his feet. He screamed as he was dragged toward the pulsating vortex. "No, this isn't how it was supposed to happen." Marcus and I ran for the exit, the sounds of screaming and destruction fading behind us. We burst out of the factory into the cool night air, gasping and trembling. We didn't stop running until we were several blocks away. Finally, we collapsed against a wall, our lungs burning. What do we do now?" Marcus panted. I shook my head, still trying to process what we had just witnessed. "I don't know, but we can't let anyone else stumble into this nightmare. We need to warn people, tell them about Blackwater Creek, about what's really out there." Marcus nodded grimly. "Who's going to believe us?" "I don't know," I admitted, "but we have to try. Whatever came through that portal, I don't think it's going to stay contained in that factory for long." As if in response to my words, a distant explosion lit up the night sky. We turned to see a plume of otherworldly energy erupting from where we had just fled, tendrils of impossible colors reaching into the stars. "It's only the beginning, isn't it?" Marcus whispered. I nodded, a mix of terror and resolve settling over me. "Yeah, but this time we're not going to be the victims. Whatever's coming, we'll face it together, and we'll do everything we can to stop it." As we set off into the night, I couldn't shake the feeling that our ordeal in Blackwater Creek had set something in motion, something that would change the world forever. The horrors we'd faced were just the tip of the iceberg. But this time, we wouldn't be caught unprepared. The true battle for our world was just beginning. And somehow, I knew we'd be right in the middle of it.